They say cherry blossoms represent beauty. But what if that beauty doesn't fade? What if it lingers, waiting? In a grove where the petals fall year-round, untouched by time, locals warn, never walk in alone, and never ever after dark. Why? They say the petals aren't just falling, they're watching. Stay with me, and I'll tell you why this haunting forest doesn't just welcome visitors, it keeps them. Before the forest grows too dark and the shadows stretch too long, go ahead and like the video if you enjoy these quiet folklore fables, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Tell me where you're watching from and what time the story finds you. Now, dim your lights and let the stillness welcome you. The thing about beauty is that it rarely stays, doesn't it? A flower withers, colors fade. That's the point, it leaves so we can miss it. But imagine finding a place where beauty never left, not just timeless, but endless. A grove of cherry blossoms in full bloom, no matter the season. Spring, summer, death, grey winter. It's always the same pink-white canopy and petals fluttering like soft snow. It sounds like a dream, doesn't it? Until you stand beneath it and something feels off. Even the locals won't get too close. They say the grove isn't a sanctuary, it's a trap. A place frozen outside of time, untouched by decay, almost like it's holding its breath. Picture the trees. Twisted, black bark wrapped in this dainty spray of blossoms that never seem to fall. The ground beneath them covered in petals so thick they press like a damp carpet underfoot. It's heavy. Too heavy for something that should feel light. Cherry blossoms are supposed to be a fleeting thing after all, a burst of life so stunning you almost forget they're meant to remind us of how short life is. One moment, the branches are full, vibrant, vivid. The next, the blooms are gone, scattered by even the softest breath of wind. People travel from every corner of the world to witness this brief spectacle, knowing they might miss it entirely if they blink too long. But this grove doesn't play by those rules. These blossoms don't fall completely. They linger, always just at the edge of perfection, and somehow that makes them wrong. Oddly enough, this grove is invisible for most of the year, hidden like a secret, overshadowed by ordinary stretches of forest, shaded hills, and quiet paths. Locals know where it is without needing maps. They'll point toward it, warn you to stay clear if you ask, but they act like it shouldn't even exist. Not really. They talk about the grove like it's alive, like its beauty has a mind of its own. One old man who runs the local tea house once said, he swore this. It always felt like it was looking back, but with more eyes than branches. Right. A lot of shrugging and nervous laughter usually follows those kinds of warnings, but nobody makes it sound like a joke. So, back to you. You're standing at the edge of this grove, staring at the pale pink canopy filtering whatever daylight manages to break through. There's something almost too perfect about the way petals float, slow and deliberate, like they've chosen where to land. No gust of wind, no real noise. Just eerie stillness. It's like stepping into a painting someone forgot to finish, but somehow the unfinished parts are the most unsettling. Only hang around too long and you start to notice. Pay attention, and you feel it in your spine, itching at the base of your skull, a kind of attention that's not yours alone. The falling petals don't just drift past, you'd swear they hesitate, hover maybe, hardly noticeable. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it, can you? No one can really explain the history of this grove. Old stories bubble up now and again about festivals or celebrations long ago, but no one agrees why this place is the way it is. There are records somewhere of a village, or at least what's left of one, buried beneath this grove. A community that supposedly vanished overnight, leaving nothing but rumors in its place. Historians will blame disease or famine or, well, imagination. But they can't explain why the cherry trees bloomed right through the worst winters afterward, petals dusting crusted snow like confetti from nowhere. And for all that beauty, and it truly is beautiful, it leaves you uneasy in a way you can't quite reason through. Maybe it's because things that break the laws of nature aren't usually this still. Wild places, even ones with myths clinging around them, tend to feel alive. Bugs humming, branches groaning, a woodpecker darting around. But this grove is quiet, oppressively so. Like the moment before a predator strikes, when the forest holds its breath and its heart skips a beat. It's not just a fear of silence, it's what the silence carries with it. Maybe that tea house owner wasn't so far off when he said, "It feels like you're being watched." Something about perfection unnerves us. It doesn't feel natural. Maybe that's because life isn't supposed to be perfect. There's some law written deep in us, in every blade of grass and cloud in the sky, that beauty is allowed to exist only because it fades. And yet the grove doesn't, or won't. It's preserved, almost like a museum exhibit, except no one put it on display. When beauty refuses to change, to age, to let time ruin it, it doesn't just stay beautiful, it becomes dangerous. And yet, some out-of-town painter or wandering tourist wanders too close every year. Some sit for hours, sketching the petals piled like snowbanks. They always describe how the colors seem richer the longer they stare. But locals watch from a distance, muttering to each other about how it's the grove choosing them, not the other way around. Even seasons fail to touch it. While the rest of the world browns, wilts or greys, this place rages in pink fury, unchanged, untouched, and, maybe, alive in ways they won't openly explain. The eerie part is, no one really bothers to maintain it, though you'll never catch a fallen branch or twisted root where it shouldn't be. How long has it been like this? The truth is, nobody knows. Some claim their grandparents avoided it, even back when the area was farmland. They said the flowers hadn't changed. Maybe they suspect the land looks after itself, or maybe it looks after much more than that. So why does it bother you the way it does? Maybe it's because this grove doesn't make sense to your instincts. It takes something inherently fragile and forces permanence on it, like something that's trying too hard, like it's meant to fool you, no, to lure you over the threshold. And each petal spiraling softly to the ground feels more deliberate than accidental. The grove stands as both temptation and warning, beautiful enough to pull you closer, yet wrong enough to make you hesitate. It's the wrongness that stays with you. Because when something is beautiful enough to silence doubt, that's when you should doubt it most. Peeling away the grove's beauty is like peeling at a painted mask to glimpse something far older and hungrier beneath. But the locals don't tell you this outright. They leave breadcrumbs instead, stories meant to frighten you just enough to keep your distance. Listen to them, or don't. But none of them will walk among those trees once the sun dips below the ridgeline. The question that lingers, the one few will answer, isn't just what's in the grove. It's what the grove itself is, something alive or something else entirely, something waiting, something beautiful only because it needs you close. The petals may be soft, the air may hum with an ancient stillness, but the locals will assure you beautiful things don't blossom forever without cost. They'll trail off after saying it, cutting their warnings short. But listen with patience and time, and they'll share what they've truly seen. Locals have a rule: never enter the grove alone. It's not just folklore to them, they treat it like any other law of nature, as if solitude inside those trees invites something they won't name. But why alone? You'd assume stepping into a grove full of cherry blossoms, witnessing something that rare and stunning, would be an experience best shared anyway. It should feel like a picnic spot, not the scene of whispered warnings. And yet, if you ask about the grove, the advice is always the same: don't go alone, especially not. At first, the reasoning sounds harmless enough. The forest is dense and unfamiliar, getting lost might be too easy. But it's not the maze of trees the locals are worried about. No, it's the fact that without someone else by your side, the grove feels closer, like it closes in, though the trees don't move. Not really. When you're alone, there's no one to tell you the shapes and the blossoms are just tricks of light, that the voices you hear don't belong. Without an anchor, it's all too easy to drift, to lose track of where you are and why you came. Every sound feels amplified, every shadow stretches deeper. Some say the forest anticipates when someone walks in unaccompanied, like it can sense the absence of a second heartbeat. You may tell yourself it's just a grove, wood and flowers and quiet. Rational enough, sure, until it's not. Because no one comes back, and that silence, they say, grows heavier the farther you walk. A hiker once joked to his friends that walking in felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, like it didn't want to wake something sleeping beneath the canopy. He didn't laugh when his group described how, from the edge, his shadow stretched into the forest but not back out. Then there's the strange wait, something impossible to put into words. People who came near the grove alone and made it back, even just to its edge, have all described the same feeling, a sensation like the air pressing against you, becoming thicker, heavier with every step past the trees. Some compared it to sinking into deep water, while others said it was closer to being draped in something soft, almost comforting, until it wasn't comforting at all, as if the grove was trying to lull, then corner them. And always, they'd mention the same thing, that unmistakable prickling sensation of being watched, but not watched as you felt on a busy street or in a crowded room, watched like prey. One superstition goes like this: when you enter alone, without another pair of eyes to confirm what's real, the grove begins to test you. You'll hear familiar voices, ones meant to draw you deeper, a parent calling your name, the laughter of a friend. If you aren't careful, your feet will start to follow those sounds on their own, and the farther you go, the quieter the real world becomes. It's subtle at first. You misplace how many steps you've taken, you think you hear something behind you, but there's nothing there when you turn to check. Then pieces of your surroundings start to look wrong. You might not notice it right away, the way a tree leans too far, or that a patch of flowers grows in a perfect spiral beneath your feet. The discomfort builds slowly until you start to question if you're the one imagining things or if the grove is doing it for you. That's the worst part, really. It doesn't take long for the grove to mess with your perspective. Colors shift slightly, leaves rustle where there's no breeze, and the blooms, already strange in how they seem immune to seasons, begin to fall slower than they should. Think about how fragile a single cherry blossom petal is, how quickly it's carried off by the smallest sigh of air. Now, picture those same petals as they drift, not fluttering but deliberate, as though guided by invisible threads, spiraling downward, one by one, tracking your path like breadcrumbs in reverse. And the shadows. The stories about those are impossible to shake. Ask the locals, and they'll tell you about the missing people, the ones who entered without a friend and never stepped back out. Some blame the spirits, restless souls drawn in by the grove and now unwilling to leave. But others say the shadows are what's left of the grove's victims in a way that's harder to explain. Left behind not as markers on the ground, but as faint impressions on the trees. The bark, they say, can sometimes catch and hold a shadow, your shadow, as if the grove took that from you first, leaving nothing for you to follow out. Take a man who ventured in during a spring afternoon. He'd been warned before, his wife had begged him not to go. But he loved the trees, he said, and wanted to walk through the flowers alone just this once. When he didn't return home, his wife and some neighbors searched for him, though none dared step past the grove's boundary when night arrived. Days passed, and eventually they found something. Not him, not even a sign of his body, but his shadow, faint as dawn light, cast across the base of one of the tallest trees. There, but not there. It stopped them cold until one of the youngest of the group reached out to see if the shadow would ripple under his fingers. The moment his hand touched the bark, every petal in the grove stilled. Leaves froze on their branches, and the air grew heavy, not with the warmth of midday, but with a sudden, bone-deep chill. After that, no one tried to retrieve anything more from the grove, not his trail, not his shadow. They left the grove alone, and it left the rest of them to their silence. Of course, people have tried to test these stories before. The adventurers, the skeptics, the curious. They'll bring lanterns, ropes, cameras, anything to outsmart whatever waits under the blossoms. But those who walk in alone, equipment or no, still don't return. The most dedicated skeptics stop asking their questions after seeing what's left of campfires set close to the grove's edge. One wrong gust of wind scatters the ash, revealing not typical burn marks but shapes. Trees, outlines etched like reverse shadows into the ground. When one man tugged at a trace left behind, he swore he felt the grove tugging back, almost like pulling on a thread stretched tightly between things too deep and too old to name. So, why is solitude the key? Why does the grove wait for someone who walks in unwatched and untethered? Maybe it's because alone, your mind is your only companion, and inside that grove, that's what it feeds on, the fragile cracks where doubt, longing, and fear settle in. Another person by your side is a tether, a reminder when the grove starts to steal your sense of time and reality. Alone, though? The grove mirrors your thoughts back at you, slowly warping them until you forget why you walked in, and by the time you realize the path behind you is gone, or that it never existed at all, that sense of isolation has already become total. When you're alone, it isn't just your body that becomes lost among the blossoms, it's your sense of self. Feeling alone and being alone aren't always the same thing, but inside the grove they collapse into each other. It isolates you completely, physically, mentally, emotionally, and once everything outside the grove fades, even the thought of leaving feels impossible, not because the path is hidden, but because the grove convinces you there's no need to find it. And that's why entering alone tips the scales so dangerously. It amplifies everything. If you felt a twinge of longing standing at the forest's edge, the second you step into the grove, that twinge becomes a storm. It feels you giving in before you even realize you're doing it. By the end of it, the locals don't care about explaining why the warnings exist. They only want you to listen. Because for every story they're willing to tell you, there are countless others they stay silent about. The ones where there wasn't even a shadow left behind, just a grove, still blooming, as if it had never stopped. Alright, picture this, you're standing in the grove, surrounded by trees heavy with cherry blossoms. The air is still, too still, not even a bird chirps from the branches. It's just you and the petals. They move, but not the way you'd expect. There's no breeze to scatter them, no gust to catch them mid-air. Instead, they fall with a strange precision, almost like they know where they're going. And maybe, just maybe, you get the sense that they're watching you. Not with eyes, but with something else entirely. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Petals watching. But if you stand there long enough, you might feel it yourself, the way the petals seem to hover a second too long before landing. The way they pile neatly at your feet, as though marking the path back out, or worse, the way deeper in. You could shrug it off at first. Odd wind patterns? Sure. Coincidence? Maybe. But you won't shake the feeling that these delicate pieces of nature aren't acting like they should. And in the grove, things rarely do. People who've come too close say the petals have a strange way of moving that's hard to describe until you see it for yourself. They call it deliberate, like the blossoms carry a kind of intent. Normally, when petals fall, they scatter and twirl, dancing on the wind. But here, they drop straight down, quiet and unnervingly calm, as though gravity works differently under these trees. Some say it's like the petals are measuring you, landing just close enough to be noticed, but never close enough to feel innocuous. One woman, a traveller who didn't know the local rules, described her walk through the grove like this. The petals didn't move when I stood still, but when I moved, they seemed to follow. One at a time, floating down, plop, plop, until I realized the path behind me was covered. By the time I wanted to turn around, it looked like I hadn't even walked that way at all. It's not just how they move, it's the quiet that comes with them. You'd think falling petals wouldn't make a sound because, well, why would they? But here, their silence is sharper. There's no gentle rustling, no sighs of leaves brushing together in the wind. If you close your eyes, it's almost as if nothing is happening at all. That's what makes it strange, how something so constant could be so controlled. A snowfall of petals blanketing the world in noise so perfectly absent it puts your thoughts on edge. It makes you hyper-aware of each step you take, every tiny sound you make, and as your steps get softer, slower, the petals, they don't, they keep falling. There's a legend that the petals don't just blanket the forest floor, they choose who they follow. Maybe it's a whim of the grove, maybe it's the way the forest tastes your presence, but the petals always seem to fall closest to those who shouldn't have come. There's one story about a man, a painter who entered the grove alone, determined to capture its beauty on canvas. As he walked deeper, he noticed that every step he took left a trail of petals behind him. It was consistent at first, like a soft rain only he could feel. But as time passed, the gaps between the petals grew smaller. He didn't say it out loud, not even to himself, but he started to feel hunted. The petals didn't just land wherever anymore, they formed soft, deliberate circles around him, gathering, closing in. By the time he bolted from the grove, clutching a canvas he hadn't even started, the petals had covered his boots so completely it looked like he hadn't walked through dirt or grass at all, just endless, hungry blossoms. And it's not just paranoia. Spend enough time near the grove and you'd hear first-hand accounts from people who claimed they felt the petals guiding them further in, like the forest itself wanted them to see something, though most can't or won't explain what. One local farmer swore he followed a trail of petals once, thinking they'd lead him back home. He'd entered the edge of the grove searching for lost livestock, staying well past sundown when the air turned thick and sour. The farther he walked, the more the petals seemed to pile, thicker and thicker, like fresh snowfall, until he couldn't see the ground at all. When he finally forced himself to stop, he turned to look at his tracks and saw nothing. The petals had erased everything behind him, leaving no sign he'd walked there at all. Of course, if you want a more chilling explanation, there's another story the locals tell. They say the grove uses the petals to gather information, almost like threads of silk someone's spinning into a web. The old tea house owner, the one who gets fidgety if anyone brings up the grove for too long, once said, "The petals know what you're thinking before you've even thought it. They'll fall at your feet like they're asking permission to follow you, and if you let them, that's it. You're theirs." It's not difficult to picture, in a place where the forest always feels alive, more alive than anywhere should. The idea that the petals are connected to something larger doesn't sound all that far-fetched. What if the cherry blossoms themselves weren't just decoration? What if they were extensions of the grove, a way for it to see you, track you, and learn how best to pull you in? You wouldn't notice the weight of them at first, how they draw your attention to the ground, distract you just enough from looking too closely at the trees or what's in them. Each petal is harmless on its own, soft and fragile as an afterthought. But together, the way they fall and move and gather, they're like the grove's eyes, watching, searching, and waiting for the moment you lower your guard. There's another part to this, though it's harder to confirm. Some say the petals don't just watch, they whisper. Not aloud, but into your thoughts, slipping in softly like a memory you didn't know you'd forgotten. The longer you stay under the falling blossoms, the more those whispers turn toward people you know or thought you did. Their voices, faint and overlapping, guide you until you can't tell how much of you is still yours. That's the point, after all. The grove doesn't need to drag you in, you're meant to walk in willingly. Who wouldn't trust the sight of petals falling, soft and innocent? The locals might bury these accounts under disapproving glares and promises that it's just stories, but they aren't convincing anyone. They know as well as anyone else that the grove doesn't let people off that easily. And the petals, they're not just a passive part of the grove's beauty. They're active, they're deliberate, they fall so softly, so gently you wouldn't notice the weight they carry until it's too late. If this all sounds too surreal to be true, to imagine a forest where even something as natural as falling petals might be alive, purposeful, you wouldn't be the first to think so. But then again, if you've never seen the grove for yourself, how sure could you be about what feels natural and what doesn't? Because according to some stories, there's only one thing that truly feels alive in the grove, you, and that might be exactly what it's waiting for. So let the petals fall. Let them pile around you, crawl closer inch by inch as though marking the spot where you stand. Just remember, they aren't falling for you, they're falling towards you. And every step you take deeper into the grove only seems to pull out more of them, almost as if they're leading you somewhere. Leading you exactly to where the grove wants you to be. What if the grove could show you something it shouldn't? Not the future, not even the present, but your memories. Imagine walking beneath the cherry blossoms only to see yourself, exactly as you were once before, flickering between the branches like a half-forgotten daydream. But it's not quite right, is it? The colors are faded, the details softened in places you don't remember. And then, all at once, it sharpens, but not how it should. A new detail you don't recognize creeps in, a smile where there shouldn't be one, a shape where there wasn't before. That's the kind of trick the grove is rumored to pull. It doesn't just trap you, it confuses you, pulling at your most personal moments like pages from a book, then rearranging them. It's not natural, and it's definitely not comforting. Something about it leaves you questioning whether your memories were ever yours in the first place. Now, memories, as you know, are slippery things. The light changes, time passes, and what you recall today isn't necessarily what you'll recall tomorrow. The location of a chair, the color of a coat, small details skew without you even noticing. But when the grove shows them to you, it's different. It feeds them back into your mind, warped ever so carefully. Uncertainty follows like a shadow, or maybe, in this case, like those shadows everyone talks about, the ones waiting just below the blossoms. People claim the grove knows how to bait you. You hear a soft voice drifting between the trees and think, surely I'm imagining this. But then the voice isn't just a voice. It's your mother calling your name in a tone from long ago, the exact tone she used when you wandered too far into the backyard as a child. Or maybe, instead of a voice, it's a laugh. Your best friend's laugh, the one you haven't heard in years. That alone might draw you in a little deeper, wouldn't it? After all, a memory isn't dangerous until it doesn't stay a memory. One man, a merchant passing through to visit distant relatives, ended up losing more than just his direction in the grove. Locals tell his story like a warning, though no one can agree on how much is strictly true. They say he was prone to daydreaming, always a bit nostalgic about the past, often lost in thought about better days. For him, the grove didn't show him booming markets or crowded streets. No, he claimed he found himself walking through his childhood town, the houses restored to before the fires that gutted them. The cobblestones were clear underfoot, each shop window lined with the candy jars he remembered stealing sideways glances at as a boy. He told someone, just once before he stopped talking about it altogether, that he'd heard the voice of his sister. She'd died when they were young, he said, but somehow the voice was unmistakable, carrying across the petals as though she'd just turned the corner ahead of him. "She's alive," was all he muttered before leading himself deeper into the grove with the gait of someone resigned to forget everything else. That's the angle the grove works. It presents you with something familiar, intimate even, but never whole. The moment you question it, that split second when doubt disrupts the comfort of recognition, it tightens its grip. And the thing about the grove, once you start doubting what's real, it gets harder and harder to stop. Here's what some survivors, if you can call them that, have described. You see a tree, and for a moment, its branches seem to mirror a shape you saw as a kid, whether it's your childhood playhouse or a neighbor's cat perched where it shouldn't have been. It's subtle, just a flicker, but enough to disrupt your footing for a beat. And then the grove escalates. A figure appears, not whole at first, nothing more than a movement glimpsed out of the corner of your eye. You chalk it up to nerves, to fatigue, but then it becomes undeniable. You hear a voice, or a hum, or, most chilling of all, your own name, but pronounced so softly it sounds like a thought slipping out into the open. If you're lucky, that's all it does. But we know by now, don't we? No one stays lucky for long in the grove. Let's say you stand still, determined not to let the strange half-memories convince you to walk any further. The falling blossoms tickle the edges of your coat. Maybe you close your eyes, thinking to reset your senses, and when you open them again, the memory's there. It's not flickering anymore, not shifting between what's real and what isn't. It's full and vivid. You see someone you know walking a path they never walked before. You hear the scrape of your father's boots, even though you've never seen him stroll through cherry blossoms in his life. Because here's the thing, the memory isn't just wrong, it's reshaped. The grove doesn't use these reflections to comfort you, though at first it might seem like that. It dangles familiarity only to disorient you. The mistakes are subtle at the beginning, the wrong tint of sunlight, voices tilted at the wrong pitch. But the longer you stand there, the more the grove disrupts what you thought was fixed. It makes you question the anchor points that ground you. Were your mother's eyes brown or hazel? Was your favorite toy missing a wheel? Or was that just something you told yourself later? And why does the memory of your birthday flicker between two locations when you only remember celebrating it once? People who linger too long in this haze often don't make it back. A local hunter admitted he'd stepped inside once, just around the edge, on a particularly quiet winter morning. At first, the birch trees ahead looked normal, frosted and delicate. Then, as he stared at the grove, it gazed back. Or at least, that's how he described it. The snow underfoot warped into a muddy riverbank from his childhood. This was his old home, he thought, or close enough. He saw his father's fishing pole propped against a log nearby, exactly how it had been during a long-ago summer. But somehow, the grove had gotten it wrong. It was out of place, not in location, but in feeling. Nothing more than a hollow moment stretched too thin. He ran. He says now it's the only thing that saved him. The grove knows how to manipulate that fragility in you. Memories aren't just something the mind engages with for fun, they're part of identity, of foundation. The grove shakes that foundation, chipping away one small detail at a time until you're unsure of where you began and where the forest ends. It uses your past against you, not as an attack, but as an invitation. And here's the truly terrifying twist. People say the grove doesn't just reassemble your memories and twist them, it takes them. You walk out thinking you escaped, only to wake up weeks later and realize you've forgotten things you swore you'd hold on to forever. Your child's first words, the name of the street you grew up on, all of it smeared like fog on a window. What's worse, some say the grove doesn't even stop there. It doesn't just consume your memories, it becomes them. The voices, the images flickering in the petals, they had to come from somewhere, didn't they? At its core, the grove isn't trying to kill you, not in the way you'd expect an ordinary predator to work anyway. It doesn't need a corpse, doesn't need to drag you into some hidden lair. What it wants is deeper. It breaks you by eroding the thing you rely on most, your sense of reality. It blurs what's real and what's imagined until you can no longer tell the difference. And then, once you've lost track of what's real, it doesn't need to hold you back. You won't want to leave. Because that's how the grove wins. It doesn't have to force you to stay, it just makes you forget that you ever wanted to leave. And, in the end, isn't that the most dangerous memory of all to lose? They say the deeper you walk into the grove, the harder it gets to breathe. At first, it sounds like superstition, a bit of exaggeration attached to an already eerie place. But the truth is, no matter how rational you think you are, the moment you cross that invisible threshold, you'll notice it. The change isn't loud or sudden. It creeps in, one small, unnerving detail at a time. The air that felt crisp and cool at the edge of the grove thickens as you take each step forward, clinging to your lungs like damp fabric. It's as if the forest exhales, slow and deliberate, just to remind you that you're not where you belong. Breathing becomes work in there, not impossible, but strained. The deeper you go, the heavier it feels, until every breath drags, slow and deliberate, like pulling water-filled fabric across a floor. You might think it's just humidity. The blossoms, after all, give the grove that soft, dreamlike quality as they carpet the ground. But this isn't a humid summer day. There's no comforting warmth here, no stickiness that washes away with a breeze. No, the air here has its own weight, as if the forest itself is leaning on you, or worse, into you. Listen long enough, and you realize it's not just your breath that's muffled. The grove has silenced everything else too. Footsteps don't crunch against the petals in the satisfying way they should. Your movements sound sluggish, dampened. Even your voice, if you dare to test it, feels caged. An obvious thought might cross your mind, maybe this is just what happens in thick, quiet forests. But even places full of dense trees and ancient roots aren't like this. Here, the silence doesn't just sit still, the air seems to eat sound. It swallows it whole. But there's more. The floral scent, so lovely when it's a passing breeze outside the grove, grows stronger as you move deeper in, more pronounced. You'd think cherry blossoms would smell delicate, soft, a tease of sweetness. Not here. The scent presses itself on you, overwhelming at first, then almost medicinal, like too much perfume dabbed on a handkerchief. It's that kind of sweetness that makes your throat close and your stomach churn, and it doesn't stop. It gets heavier the farther you go, until you feel like you're breathing flowers. Not just their petals, but the stems, the sap, even the raw soil. Every breath stains you, filling your chest until it feels like your lungs could burst. The worst part? You don't stop breathing it in. The grove won't let you stop. People describe the change in ways that always circle back to the same unsettling conclusion. The air in the grove feels alive. Not alive as in fresh or pure, but alive in a way that makes you a part of it. One visitor, years ago, swore she could feel it working its way into her skin. She was an artist, there to study the blossoms, and though she only ventured a short distance into the grove, she described the air as too close. To hear her tell it, it wasn't air anymore. It was something else, something thick enough to cling to her pores like an invisible mist crawling in. She turned back before she reached the heart of the grove, but for weeks afterward she claimed she could smell the blossoms clinging to her clothes, even in places far from the forest. "It never really left me," she said. "Or maybe I never really left it." The suffocating air doesn't just weigh on your chest, it messes with your mind. Breathing in the floral scent doesn't feel calming or relaxing, it feels deceptive, too potent to trust. Your body reacts first, labored breaths, muscles tightening, and sweat forming even if it isn't warm. But then the grove takes a deeper hold. You start to lose track of how long you've been walking. Seconds feel like minutes, and minutes feel like hours, until the rhythm of time stretches out and snaps back without warning. The petals falling around you don't help. They tumble at a steady pace, too steady, and when you glance up, the pattern makes it difficult to look anywhere else. Most people don't realize just how much their sense of reality depends on small, ordinary details. Which way the light bends, how the air shifts when you step into a shadow, the sensation of your own breath anchoring you to the moment. The grove unravels these threads one by one. The light under the canopy turns erratic, too dim to orient yourself but too bright to feel restful. Time drags because the air feels slow, like swimming through syrup, and yet hours disappear without explanation. As for your breathing, the more effort it takes, the more desperate you feel, as if the forest isn't just taking your air, it's sharing something back. Some say the grove traps you physically first, convincing your senses that you're too tired to move. But the way it truly catches you, that happens in your mind. The air itself whispers this subtle suggestion. Stop thinking about where you came from. Keep walking. It's quiet enough that you think it's your own inner thoughts. There's no sudden realization, no snap that tells you you're no longer in control. It builds gradually, like the way a headache creeps until it's undeniable. One step blends into the next, and before you know it, you don't even remember the direction you were going. You just keep walking forward, drawn by an invisible tug you can't place, and in the wrong direction. There are superstitions, of course, tied to this strange atmosphere. The locals believe that the grove's air contains something unnatural, not just the floral scent, but an essence tied to the forest's power. Elders whisper that the blossoms are constantly dying and regenerating, expelling a kind of energy that noiselessly invades anyone who dares cross their path. Whether that's literal or a metaphor, it doesn't matter much, does it? Everyone agrees on one thing. The longer you breathe in that air, the less you notice what's wrong, and noticing what's wrong is the only thing keeping you safe. Take the story of the girl whose family lived nearest to the grove's edge. Her name's vanished from memory, as these stories often go, but the details linger like shadows. She'd grown up with the grove in her backyard, watching its blossoms outline the horizon every spring. For years, she avoided the grove because of her parents' warnings, even venturing close only during rare daytime errands. But one warm evening, feeling sorry for herself after an argument, she ignored their rules. She walked in. The first thing she noticed, she told this to a friend later, was the smell. Sweet, dense, nothing like the faint aroma she'd caught from a safe distance before. The ground felt soft but uneven, like its surface rested on something that shifted beneath her weight. Then came the air, heavier with every step. She said it made her head foggy, her thoughts dull, and yet she didn't stop walking. By the time she reached the grove's center, the air felt thick enough she swore she could touch it. It wasn't me staying, she said. It was me forgetting how to leave. They found her 3 days later, wandering back out with blossoms clinging to her hair. She couldn't explain what she'd been doing during her absence. When asked why she hadn't just turned back, she'd only say, "I didn't know which way back was." That lingering air, the weight of it stays with you even after you escape. You breathe it in for only a moment, but the grove takes longer to leave your system. Visitors report smelling blossoms days or even months later on their clothes, in their hair, even in rooms where no flowers were kept. a faint floral scent, different from any real cherry blossom, somehow following them wherever they go. What's worse, they say, is the sensation that never quite disappears, the feeling like the grove is still breathing with them, one slow inhale for every exhale. This is what makes the grove most dangerous. Its grip isn't physical, not at first, it's the way it convinces you to let go of clarity. The oppressive air, the muffled sounds, the way petals fall without rhythm, all of it combines into a single, overwhelming effect, disorientation. And the worst part? The longer you stay, the more you stop caring. It doesn't trap you with force, it soaks through you, slowly altering your perception until the thought of leaving feels as foreign as the idea of staying once did. The forest's atmosphere isn't just heavy, it's invasive. It wraps around your thoughts, sliding its way in unnoticed, until you can no longer tell if it's your own breath you're counting or the grove's. And once it's inside you, the question isn't whether the forest will let you leave, it's whether you even remember that you ever wanted to. The locals have a story they don't like to tell, and the few who do only whisper it late at night when the doors are locked and the lights are low. They say the grove doesn't leave behind missing persons reports or bodies for the police to search for. It doesn't break branches or leave signs of a struggle. But there's one thing it does leave: shadows. And these shadows? They don't belong to the trees. Imagine this, you're walking the edge of the grove, staying well out of its reach, just like you've been warned. The trees are still, the blossoms fall as they always do, a slow, soft cascade. On the ground, your shadow stretches behind you, black against the patchy light. But then you notice something. Under the cherry trees there are other shadows, dark, unmoving, and undeniably human. The strange thing is, there's no one to cast them. They're just there. Shadows shouldn't be able to act on their own, that's part of how we think about them. They're passive. They depend on something else to exist. But under the canopy of the grove, these shadows seem to defy that logic. They stretch long and sharp against the glowing pink backdrop of fallen petals, sticking to the trunks and roots like they've been stamped there. At first, you might not even think they're unusual, not until you realize they don't shift with the angle of the sunlight. They don't bend, don't fade. And they don't belong to anything at all. The locals explain it like this: the grove doesn't just take people, it marks them. These shadows, the ones sitting unnaturally beneath the blossoms, are what remain after the forest decides to keep someone, not their bodies, not their voices. Just this outline, this final trace, like the forest plucked everything else away and used the shadow as a placeholder. It's eerie enough as an idea, but if you've seen one yourself, it's worse. The way they sit there, still and endless, waiting for something, or maybe for someone. There's an argument, especially among those who scoff at the superstitions, that the shadows are just tricks of light. When the landscape is thick with trees, it's easy to see patterns where there are none, right? A smudge of shade here, a smear of bark there. No, they're so precise that you can make out every detail, shoulders, heads, even fingers extended like the person was reaching when the shadow was taken, and they're unnaturally vivid against the pastel softness of the grove. Dark to the point that some claim they appear deliberately drawn rather than cast by the sun. One story has stuck with the community for decades. A man, a contractor working to clear a nearby path, stumbled across a shadow that made his heart stop. It wasn't just any shadow, it was his. Perched across a stone beneath the greatest tree in the grove, unmistakable in the shape of his hands, the curve of his hat, even the knife clicked to his belt that he knew he hadn't touched in weeks. When he backed up to check if he was somehow casting it, the shadow didn't move. It didn't follow him, didn't shift with his gestures. There was simply no reason it should have been there. He sprinted back to town, his crew abandoning the job before they'd finished marking the area. And even though he never so much as glanced toward the grove again, locals swear it was only a few weeks later that he left town without so much as saying goodbye. Maybe he left, or maybe the grove made sure of it. Here's something the locals won't tell you unless you ask the right way. The shadows are more than just marks, they're warnings, symbols left behind to show how close someone came to being swallowed whole. They don't always belong to the missing, you see. Sometimes it's the places where people escape that bear these imprints. It's as if the grove wants to remind whoever made it out just how lucky they were, or maybe unlucky considering what's left behind. Hunter recalls stepping into the grove on a bet. He didn't mean to go far, not farther than a few minutes' walk. But curiosity has a way of coaxing more out of you. The deeper he went, the heavier the feeling of the space became, the still air pressing against him, the faint hints of movement at the edges of his vision. When he turned back, he almost missed it. The shadow stretched across the roots of a nearby tree, posed with a rifle over one shoulder. It wasn't just any shadow, it was his, same height, same stance, same details as he'd seen in reflections countless times before. He left immediately, and though he still hunts, he won't get near cherry blossoms anymore. When asked why, the only thing he says is, "I'd rather undo all my footsteps than tempt that place twice." There's something about a shadow, isn't there? The idea of it staying behind when the person it belongs to disappears feels more wrong than blood or damage left at a scene. Maybe it's because a shadow, as intangible as it is, feels like it contains something essential to us. It's always there, tied to us, even in our most fleeting moments. So when you see one in the grove, detached from its owner, the result feels unnatural, empty, like you're staring at something removed surgically, left without context. And what if the shadow waits, not as a remnant, but as a beacon, a marking inviting the grove to claim whoever comes close? There's one theory, that once the grove takes someone, the shadow becomes a part of it. That's why so many of them cling to the base of trees or rap unnaturally against the patterns in the petals. The grove doesn't just hold its victims, it absorbs them, transforms them into something it can use. It doesn't hold onto bodies or souls the way we usually think about hauntings. Instead, it keeps the only part of us that always lingers, trailing behind like a second skin in the brightness of day. During the night, under a full moon, they say the shadows almost seem to stir. Not much, just a flicker, there and not, but enough to make you realize the grove doesn't forget who it's taken. The question of what happens to the rest of the person is one the locals avoid entirely. They don't want to think too deeply about what the grove consumes when a shadow is all that's left. One woman summed it up best on a quiet, rainy afternoon at the edge of the marketplace. It's not that the people who go in die, it's that they become the forest. Their breath becomes the wind, their whispers fill the petals. And their shadows warn the rest of us what not to do. There's another piece of folklore most people walk away before hearing. It's said that if you see your own shadow separate from you in the grove, if you catch it sitting beneath a tree, as still and silent as the others, you don't just lose yourself, you lose the memory of yourself. Maybe that's why the grove's victims aren't pulled back into scream-filled chaos. Maybe they aren't trying to escape. Maybe, by the time the grove claims them, they no longer remember why they ever wanted to go back to where the light hits their faces. At its heart, this is why the shadow stories are so chilling. The grove doesn't just take people, it keeps their outlines as trophies or warnings, or worse, as a record of who they once were. And if a shadow does remain after you fled, that doesn't mean you're safe. It just means the grove isn't finished with you. Because here's the most unnerving part of all. Locals swear the shadows are always waiting, motionless and silent. But they aren't always empty. Some say if you look too long, you'll see something else in them staring back, and if you do, the shadow might not stay in the grove for long. They say the grove is haunted, but not the way you'd expect. It's not shadowy figures lurking in the corners or a face appearing behind a fogged-up window, no. The locals will tell you this grove isn't haunted by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by celebration. Something far worse, because it doesn't feel wrong at first. It feels inviting, festive. They say the laughter of the dead, like old festival songs, still drifts through the petals. And once you hear it, you'll want to follow it, even if you don't know where it's leading. It started, they say, with a festival many generations ago, back when the village that bordered the grove was alive with people. It was spring, as beautiful and fleeting as ever, and a time meant for joy. Cherry blossoms bloomed all along the hills, scattering into the rivers and fields as the villagers prepared for their largest festival of the year. It was a celebration of life, a way to honor the fleeting beauty of nature and remind everyone how precious each season was. The stories say dancing stretched long into the night, with lanterns strung from tree to tree creating rivers of soft, warm light among the pink blossoms. Things were perfect, until they weren't. No one agrees on what exactly happened. Some say it was an illness, a sudden fever that swept through the crowds like a silent wind, invisible but deadly. Others say a fight broke out, something trivial that spread into chaos too quickly to be stopped. A few whispered darker stories, ones they don't dare share in polite company, about a curse brought down by someone who wasn't meant to be there. Whatever it was, it ended the same way. What had begun as a celebration turned into a disaster, spilling grief into the roots of the grove and staining it in ways no one could undo. They say nearly the whole village was lost that night, claimed by the grove through a mixture of smoke, panic, and confusion. Some died where they stood, the blossoms still catching in their hair as though trying to comfort them. Others, it said, wandered deeper into the forest, driven mad by the buzzing of cicadas and the sound of distant drums that seemed to move further away the closer they came. The festival ended, but its echoes, well, those never did. Today the grove stays eerily tied to those moments of celebration. As much as it's been feared, it's also still revered, respected as a burial ground of sorts for those who perished in that single, terrible night. But respect doesn't mean safety, and the locals will be the first to tell you that, while the grove might look beautiful, it isn't kind. They say the spirits of the villagers linger there, their souls bound to the joy and festivity they were never ready to leave behind. And because they can't move on, they don't want to be forgotten. That's where you come in. On certain nights, spring mostly, when the blossoms are thickest and the air feels heavy, you can still hear the festival deep within the grove. Not in that obvious way you'd hear a parade or a celebration from afar, but faint, almost implied, a distant hum that you can't quite place, the occasional rhythmic beat of drums, laughter that seems to cut out the second you stop moving to listen. They say it's never clear, not clear enough to recognize a specific voice, but always just enough to make you think it's real, enough to make you keep walking closer. There's one legend about a child, a boy who wandered into the grove during a spring evening when the light was soft and gold and the trees dripped with blossoms. He'd only gone a little way in, they say, following the sound of festival music. He thought he heard his sister laughing. She'd been teasing him earlier that day, hiding his wooden toys in the grass, and it led him deeper, deeper than he intended to go. His father found his shoes the next morning, neatly placed at the grove's edge. The boy? They never found him. But locals claim that on certain spring nights you can still hear the laughter of a child echoing between the trees, bright and teasing, as if someone's still searching for a sibling who isn't there. These spirits, or whatever they are, aren't malevolent in the way horror stories usually paint ghosts. They don't scream or snarl or drag you kicking and clawing into the dark. That's not their purpose. They're lonely, trapped, desperate for someone to join the eternal festival they were never ready to leave behind. And so they do what the grove itself seems to do, they tempt. They make it impossible to resist stepping further in. After all, who wouldn't want to hear laughter, to feel joy? The catch, of course, is that the festival doesn't let you leave. Not really. Some people, the ones too curious or too bold for their own good, ignore the warnings. They hear the stories and think they'll go home with a good campfire tale, a chuckle at the expense of some old tradition. Those are the ones who come back different, if they come back at all. A woman who ignored the locals' advice once told a story about hearing koto strings humming through the trees as she walked in. The sound hypnotized her, pulling her further and further until she found herself in what she swore was an empty festival ground. It was beautiful, she'd said, but there was no one there. The music started to sound wrong, like it was just for me. She barely made it out, clutching her husband's coat to fight off the chill she claimed followed her all the way home. Another tale, this one whispered among the older villagers, talks about how the music can change depending on who enters. For children, it's the giggling of laughter and soft claps. For parents, it's the mournful pull of flutes. Some even say the spirits are kind enough to use something familiar, dredging up sounds from past festivals their victims attended once before, a song from a wedding maybe, or the rhythmic beat of a dance only their family used to know. Familiarity feels safe when it shouldn't, and that's how you get lured in. Perhaps the most unsettling detail the locals share is what happens when you try to ignore it. The farther you walk without answering the festival's call, the louder the sounds seem to grow, not distant anymore, but much closer. Laughter skips just beside your left ear, too soft for anyone other than you to hear. Steps trail you, slow and patient. And on rare occasions people swear they've seen small, glowing lanterns swaying between the branches, moving further into the grove as if guiding them somewhere. If you've walked far enough to see those, they say, it's already too late. But the scariest thing about these spirits isn't their desperation or their twisted cheer, it's that part of you might actually want to stay with them. Something about the grove's beauty, about the music in the air, all of it taps into that longing we've all felt at some point. The longing for simplicity, for joy, for times when things made sense. The spirits don't take you against your will. Instead, they make staying feel like the better option. In the end, the grove isn't just haunted, it's a lure, a final resting place for those who wanted too much to hold on to fleeting joy. The festival they celebrate isn't malicious, but it's endless, a memory replaying over and over, desperate to pull others into its rhythm. And the spirits who wander the grove aren't strangers. They're reflections of anyone who's ever wanted the moment to last a little longer. That's what makes it dangerous. It isn't just a forest full of restless souls. It's a mirror for the parts of ourselves we fear the most, the parts that don't want to let go. They say the forest doesn't take you violently, it doesn't chase you down or drag you kicking and screaming into the shadows. It doesn't need to. What it does instead is far more unsettling. It takes you softly, quietly, almost gently. You walk in, you see nothing wrong, you even stop to admire the beauty of the place. And by the time you realize you're not coming back, you don't care. That's the power of the grove. It doesn't just hold you, it convinces you to let yourself be held. When people disappear into the grove, they never leave behind signs of panic, no claw marks in tree bark, no broken branches or torn clothing. More often than not, they leave things behind, belongings abandoned at the edge, as if they simply shrugged off the weight of their old life before stepping in. A boot here, a scarf draped neatly over a rock. It's eerie, but also peaceful. Something about it feels intentional, as though entering the grove is less like being lured into a trap and more like accepting an invitation. The unsettling part is how much people seem to want it, the stories, the warnings. They're always about how beautiful the grove is, how it feels welcoming, even when you know it shouldn't, like walking into a dream where nothing adds up, but it's too perfect to question. Picture standing under those blossoms, petals falling around you so softly they hardly seem to touch the ground. The forest hums with a faint sound, barely there, like the distant murmur of an old lullaby, just soothing enough to make you pause. The light filters through the branches in streaks of gold and pink that feel alive somehow, more vivid than anything you've ever seen before. And all of it, every detail, whispers to you, stay. It's no surprise then that those who go into the grove don't seem to resist. One story the locals tell is about a woman who vanished into the grove decades ago. She was never particularly unhappy. She had a quiet life, enough to get by. But people remembered her as someone who stared just a little too long out of open windows, who lingered at the edge of things without ever stepping fully in. When the blossoms bloomed out of season that year, she walked into the grove on a summer evening and never came out. The search for her didn't last long. No one found any tracks, no sign of her at all except for a single ribbon she wore, tied neatly to one of the lower branches as though she'd left it as a kind of offering. Some say she left it there as a farewell, but others claim the grove doesn't just lure people, it gives them a moment to say goodbye. But what makes the grove's taking so frightening isn't just its beauty, it's how it works on you from the inside. People who get close, but not too close, describe the same thing. This sense that their thoughts aren't entirely their own anymore. They stop thinking about what they're leaving behind, and the idea of turning back feels wrong. Imagine walking through a soft rain of petals, the kind of quiet that feels weightless, and realizing you haven't thought about work or dinner or even who you are in minutes, maybe hours. You've only thought about how nice it feels to stay here for just a little longer and longer. That's how the grove wins. It doesn't need to pull you in, it just lets you lose track of how far you've already walked. The longer you stay, the softer your surroundings seem. The path behind you stops feeling real, and the way forward feels like the only option. Someone once described this place as a forest that forgets for you. You don't fight it because you don't realize there's anything to fight. One hiker, who foolishly tested the grove's edge but managed to return, talked about the sounds of the place. He described them as calm, which should have been comforting, except they were too calm. The air carried no birdsong, no rustling leaves, just this faint, persistent hum, so quiet at first he thought it might be in his head. "It wasn't in my head, though," he said later, taking long pauses between sentences, almost like the memory itself made him tired. The sound came from everywhere, the trees, the air. It felt like it came from me, too. You can't underestimate that hum. It's soft, harmless, almost too faint to notice, but after a while it matches the rhythm of your breathing. It sets a pattern, coaxing your thoughts into something slower and steadier. You take one step, then another, with only the present moment to guide you. And that's when it starts. Your thoughts dissolve into the softness, leaving behind only that steady pull to keep going. But none of this is accidental. The grove plays with longing in ways you don't notice until it's too late. It's like it knows what you're missing before you even step inside. That's what makes it so dangerous. If you feel lonely, it gives you company in the form of sounds. Laughter carried through the trees or footsteps pacing just out of sight. If you feel directionless, the grove lays a path for you, petals swirling together to form a trail that looks like it leads somewhere, though you never think to check where. And if you feel tired of the world, of all its edges and rules and harshness, the grove offers something softer in return. Over time, people have wondered why the grove seems to choose certain victims and not others. Some speculate it's random, but there's a pattern to those who are drawn to it, the broken-hearted, the lonely, those who are too caught up in chasing beauty without thinking of the cost. They say the grove's power isn't in its strength, but in its subtlety. It unravels you thread by thread, slipping into those quiet spaces inside you where doubt and yearning live. The most chilling thing about the grove, though, the thing that haunts the people who've made it back, isn't what it does. It's what it doesn't do. The victims don't cry for help. They don't claw at the ground or scream into the trees. When they're gone, they're just gone. And from the few stories locals have pieced together, it becomes clear that the grove doesn't need to take someone violently when it can simply convince them to stay, to disappear willingly. That, in itself, is worse somehow. To imagine that someone could vanish so completely, so softly, they'd never even realize they were lost. One tale speaks of a young man who walked into the grove after losing his partner. He hadn't said much in the days leading up to it. Not about his grief, not about the blossoms blooming suddenly that year, but his housekeeper noted that he'd left the door unlocked behind him. It was as if, on some level, he knew he wouldn't be coming back. Witnesses claimed they saw him walking among the trail of petals at dusk, his steps unhurried, as if taking a late-night stroll. He was smiling. And maybe that's the final, terrifying truth about the grove. It doesn't just consume its victims, it convinces them to give parts of themselves freely. Their longing, their pain, their desires. It takes all those threads of wanting and knits them into its endless beauty. The cherry blossoms, the soft rain of petals, the delicate hum in the air. All of it is made from those who walked too far for too long. The grove's beauty feels alive because it is as alive, and every piece of it speaks of someone who didn't realize, until it was too late, that they'd already been claimed. The scariest part? The grove's victims never know they're being taken. A single step at a time, one breath, one moment, until they fade into the forest as softly as the petals that always seem to fall. What does it mean to disappear into beauty? To step into something so perfect it feels like it was made just for you, wrapping itself around your thoughts until you forget the rest of the world exists? On paper, it doesn't sound so bad, especially when life feels heavy. But when you think about it, when you really sit with the idea, it's unsettling, isn't it? Because disappearing like that doesn't come without a cost. And while it happens inside the cherry blossom grove, that cost is everything. Let's talk about people for a second. Humans are wired for beauty. We chase it, surround ourselves with it, hold on to it like it's something that can fix us. A soft sunrise, a perfect garden, even just a quiet spot behind your house where the light hits just right. These moments can feel like shelter when everything else feels wrong. And when you're dealing with heartbreak or loneliness, or just the sheer weight of life pressing down on you, beauty becomes more than a distraction. It feels like an escape. Now, that doesn't sound like a bad thing, does it? Escaping into something beautiful. But the problem comes when you don't stop to ask what the cost is. And in the cherry blossom grove, beauty is much more than it seems on the surface. You could call it generous. After all, it gives you what you think you need. Time to pause, time to reflect, time to forget whatever it is you're running from. But that generosity hides the grove's real purpose. It doesn't offer beauty for free. It weaponizes it. Let's say you're someone who feels the pull, the kind of person who's gone too long without joy. You step under the canopy of blossoms, and for a second, the weight you've been carrying lifts. The petals fall like snow, soft and delicate, brushing against your face as you walk. The light spilling through the branches is tinged in pink and gold, like the grove has rewritten the rules of nature just to cradle you in its warmth. The ground beneath your feet is soft enough to feel otherworldly. It's perfect. Of course you'd want to stay. Why wouldn't you? But here's the thing about that beauty. It doesn't change. Walk through it long enough and you'll realize the strangeness buried in its perfection. Because beauty, real beauty, is fleeting. It moves, it fades, it makes you ache because you know it won't last. But in this grove, it doesn't fade. The blossoms never wither. The light doesn't dim. The petals seem infinite, and that's where it starts to unravel. The constant perfection feels less like a blessing and more like a trap. Because when beauty isn't fleeting anymore, it stops being something you can appreciate. It becomes something overwhelming, something that consumes. Cherry blossoms have always represented the fleeting nature of beauty, the way joy and life are precious because they don't last forever. In Japanese culture, they're tied to the idea of impermanence, the way our most beautiful moments are also our most fragile. But this grove takes that symbolism and twists it. It stretches something naturally fleeting into eternity, making it unnatural, almost predatory. When beauty becomes eternal, it's no longer something that mirrors life. It becomes something that erases it, and that's exactly what the grove does. The people who wander in don't recognize it at first. They think they've found something special, something magical. But what starts as an escape soon becomes something impossible to leave. One step at a time, you sink into the perfection of the blossoms. The pain and fear you carried with you fade so quickly you don't even notice. But then, the pieces of yourself that those feelings tethered you to start to fade too. The grove takes the edges of your reality and sands them down until you lose the parts of yourself that might have led you out. It doesn't need to pull you in forcefully because you walk willingly. The grove tricks you into trading everything difficult about life for something easy, something soft, something endlessly beautiful. And by the time you realize what you've let go of, it's too late to take it back. One story the locals tell is about a poet who entered the grove decades ago. He wasn't running from anything particular, not heartbreak or tragedy, just a kind of quiet dissatisfaction with the world. He walked the boundary line for years, always watching the petals fall from the edge but never stepping through. But something about the day the blossoms turned gold under a stormy sky made him finally go in. He carried nothing but a notebook and pencil, and when he reached the grove's heart, he must have thought he'd found a kind of paradise. It made him forget what made his poems unique, his ability to see the cracks in that perfection. He left his notebook at the base of a tree, neatly closed. Written across the final page in scratchy letters were 5 words: "This is what I wanted." The grove gives you an escape from pain, yes, but at a cost. What it truly steals isn't your body or even your memories. It takes your connection to the world outside. By offering endless beauty, it severs the balance we rely on to feel alive. Pain and joy, sadness and wonder, it's all part of being human. Even blossoms die, scattering themselves wildly to remind you that beauty is precious because it's fleeting. But in this grove there's no end, no death, no decay, just endless, unchanging beauty. And the longer you stay, the more that beauty smooths away everything that once made you who you are. And isn't that the danger of escapism? On the surface, it feels like a break. Stepping into a peaceful moment might help you reset, even inspire you to keep going. But if you cling too tightly to the escape, it turns into avoidance. It becomes a place that keeps you stuck, offering comfort that slowly devours the things you most need to confront. The grove is, in many ways, the perfect metaphor for that. It takes the longing for escape and turns it into a trap. The more you think you're running away from pain, the deeper you fall into its grasp. The scariest part about all of this isn't just that the grove takes people. It's that it gives them what they think they want before it does. It offers silence to those who hate the noise of the world. It offers beauty to the broken-hearted. To the lonely, it offers the whisper of company. It knows how to pull at the weakest, most vulnerable parts of you, and it promises relief, but at the cost of everything. There's something uniquely human about wanting to disappear every once in a while. Life can be brutal, exhausting. Sometimes it feels unfair to even try to keep yourself tethered to it. And the grove? It caters to that longing better than anything else could. But in the end, the grove isn't showing you the beauty of escape. It's showing you the danger of it. Because disappearing into beauty sounds like an easy fix, right? But when you disappear, what's left? The Cherry Blossom Grove is a place of impossible perfection, a dream where you can surrender your pain, your fear, your loneliness. But in doing so, you also surrender your grounding in the world. You stop missing people. You stop wanting anything outside the grove to matter. You let the blossoms, the beauty, the endless quiet replace the messier, more complicated parts of living. And once you've surrendered those parts, what's left isn't you, it's just an extension of the grove itself. As a cautionary tale, the grove is about far more than haunting beauty. It's a story about losing yourself to the things you think you want most. It warns us, in that quiet way myths often do, that longing unchecked can undo you. The beauty of the grove isn't a gift, it's a siren song. Temporary pain becomes part of life. But the grove whispers that you'll only feel joy if you step away from the world entirely. In that, it isn't just a place, it's a reflection, a mirror for every dangerous desire we carry. It tells us to stay when we should be remembering how to leave. The Cherry Blossom Grove isn't just a forest, it's a reflection, one far more unsettling than its beauty suggests. It shows us longing in its purest form, to escape, to hold on to fleeting moments, to lose all sense of self for something perfect. But that mirror is dangerous. Step too close, and it gives you what you think you want by taking everything you are. So, what would the grove show you if you walked in? And more importantly, would you remember to leave? Thanks for joining me tonight. If this story lingered with you, subscribe for more haunting tales and share your thoughts below. I'll be reading.